All right, welcome everyone. We are in the Partnering with Internet Service Providers session. If that's where you meant to be, you're in the right place. If that's not where you meant to be, you should stay because it's going to be a good conversation. So this is better than the other options. That's not true, they're all great. I forgot we're live streaming and this is recorded. Because we are live streaming, I'll just give a reminder to all of our panelists, make sure we're speaking into the mics, and also, more importantly, to our audience, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. I'm going to ask you to step up into the awkwardly positioned microphone right in the very, very front of the room. But make sure when you're asking a question that you are right up in the microphone so that folks listening online can hear you and that our captioning picks it up. I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves here in just a moment. But before we get started, my name's Aaron Schill. I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives at NDIA. We're really pleased to have you all and looking forward to a great conversation about how folks in communities and local governments and other organizations can partner to further digital inclusion work with internet service providers. Yeah, I think with that, that's all my notes. So let me turn it over to our panelists. So I'll ask each of them to introduce themselves, the work that they do, and also share an example of how they and their work are partnering with community organizations to further digital inclusion work. I forgot my one other preface to this is we have 3 different types of ISP represented up here. We have a nonprofit ISP, a municipal or government publicly run ISP, and also small internet service providers, and particularly rural internet service providers represented. So I'll mention that just to give you some food for thought and to start thinking about questions that you might want to ask from those perspectives. And with that, I will turn it over to our first panelist, Roxy, to introduce herself.
Can you hear me? Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Erin and the NDIA team, for having myself and NTCA, the Rural Broadband Association, with this amazing panel. My name is Roxy Barboza, NTCA's Industry and Cybersecurity Policy Analyst. And so a little bit of background on NTCA. NTCA is a membership association that with the goal of improving communication services around rural America. And so we represent around 850 community-based providers serving rural America, of course, and at NTCA, we are advocating on behalf of them, but also their communities in DC when it comes to the various areas such as cyber, natural disasters, to even digital inclusion, right? And so a little bit in the work that we do when it comes to digital inclusion, we have a lot of initiatives, right? We have Smart Rural Communities, which is SRC for short. It's a program that amplifies our member efforts when it comes to them, not just having the focus on deployment, but going above and beyond, right? So we have SRC, we have the Foundation for Rural Service Community grants for our members that want to promote community engagement and participation. We develop white papers, and most importantly, soon we will be having our digital inclusion series, helping our members promote digital inclusion efforts and how to go about that when it comes to community partnerships. And one of the examples that I do want to highlight when it comes to community partnerships is the community partnership between our NTCA member Sacred Wind Communications and the Navajo Housing Authority. And so this partnership came about around 2020 when they realized that, hey, we want to not only continue serving our members, but to replace the network of copper cable with fiber optic cable in specific developments managed by the Navajo Housing Authority. And so in 2020, they completed the first ever groundbreaking broadband fiber to the home project to Navajo homes within a Navajo Housing Authority development in the Huérfano chapter. And since 2020, when this project came about, up until now, they have completed 3 development projects with the Navajo Housing Authority, which they are serving 280 homes now with fiber to the home. And so that's a little bit of background of myself, NTCA, and a community partnership within our membership.
All right, my turn. Can you guys hear me? Is everybody going to ask that when we start talking? My name's Crystal Ivey, and I'm with the Knoxville Utilities Board. So I'm the municipal provider that Aaron mentioned, and we actually provide electricity, gas, water, wastewater, and now newly broadband. So we do all of the utilities now at KUB. Our territory varies very widely. We have some extremely urban areas near the University of Tennessee and downtown Knoxville, and then we have some extremely urban or extremely rural areas that have less than 5 homes per mile. So our territory really runs the gamut in terms of population density. We recently received approval last summer to provide retail broadband within our footprint from the Tennessee State Comptroller and our City Council. We went through the full process and we got approval to provide fiber to the home to all of the households within our footprint, and that's about 230,000 households. And strangely enough, it will actually make us the largest municipally owned broadband network in the country when the project is complete. Yeah, woohoo. So we plan to connect our first customers this fall. So we're feverishly working towards that. I need the supply chain to be better so we can meet that goal. But we are planning to connect our first customers this fall, and we think it'll take 6 to 7 years to get our entire territory fully built out. But we're going to be applying for federal and state funding, of course, to try to expedite that process as much as we can. And as some of you, I've worked with some of you in my previous capacity. I was the state broadband director for the state of Tennessee before I came over to KUB. And so I think that experience and seeing how important not just access to the infrastructure itself, but also making sure communities are equipped to use it, I think has really colored my perspective in working at KUB as we are building the network, making sure that as we are putting the wires up, we're also thinking about what the community is going to do with it. So I will give just a brief example because I don't want to steal my thunder later, because I'm going to talk about this later, but we're working on a low-income student service offering for our student population in our territory that will be in addition to the ACP that we're also going to be participating in. So I'll talk a little bit about that later, and the community partners that we're working with together to make that happen.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sam Garfinkel. I'm the Executive Director of MetaMesh Wireless Communities. We are a nonprofit wireless internet service provider, so a WISP, based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I'll just give a little bit of background, kind of the evolution of our organization and kind of how we came to be a full-scale WISP. Originally, as you might infer from the name, this organization focused primarily on mesh networking. So that's very hyper-local. It's effective for many use cases, but it's low impact in that there's less privacy and there's just less people that can take advantage of that type of technology. Then, of course, pandemic. So we were called upon by some of the universities in Pittsburgh to design a solution immediately for the teachers and the educators that they were already interfacing with and providing support to throughout the pandemic. And so we really had a tall order, and I think that we really measured up. We scaled up very quickly and transitioned that focus to wireless technology. It would reach more people, and it would be faster than other solutions that are more long-term. Of course, there are constraints to this type of technology. It's based on line of sight, but there's also a lot of options for different kinds of interventions and layering different technologies. And so that's where we are right now. And I just want to tell you a little bit about the WISP experience and how we spun it up. We ran a pilot that started at the end of 2020, and we decided that there was no humanly way possible that we could create this solution in a vacuum. Everyone expected us to have all the answers, and we had, this networking experience. But beyond that, we didn't know the community we wanted to serve. We didn't know, who to tap on for resources. And so through this kind of chaos, we created a work group, and we call it WISP Wednesday. And every Wednesday, we meet with every stakeholder, community organization, vendor partner, technology consultants that were involved in the pilot, which served 3 underserved communities with our wireless technology. And everybody seemed to come with their own predetermined role. You know, some needed a solution, some were trying to participate in the design of the solution. And what we realized through this deeply collaborative process is that distributed leadership was the best way for us to achieve what we needed to. And you soon saw that, you know, some of those community partners now became sponsoring stakeholders, and some of these roles started to shift as people saw, hey, I can actually contribute to this issue in ways I didn't understand before I had this cohort. And so I feel like that's a really unique example of partnership. And it's private, it's public, and there's community involvement as well.
Great. So I think you can see why we were so excited for this panel. We have a whole range of service provider types. We have a range of technologies, a range of communities that are served. So really excited to hear these different perspectives. I'm going to ask our panelists a few questions, and then we really want to open it up and leave as much time as possible for this to be conversation. So think about questions, encourage you to, when we get through the first couple, probably maybe just line up down the center aisle and then have folks step up to the microphone and ask questions. So we're excited about having some robust conversation. To kick us off, Crystal, first question is for you. So as you said, you're in the process of establishing a municipal ISP in Knoxville. So what types of local partnerships are you finding so far that have been most successful in raising awareness and reaching into the communities that you particularly want to target, both geographically and also particular communities that we know are underserved with your service?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and we are new at this, so we're still in the process of doing that, of reaching out and trying to, there was a lot of excitement in the community, but we want to make sure that people know what's happening, they know what the timeline is, they know, you know, what funding we're going after, they know what kind of programs we're going to be offering. So we're working with lots of community partners to do that. But I just wanted to say briefly that, you know, when I was working on this issue on the state level, and I was really excited to really sort of take that boots on the ground approach and work with a provider. It feels a little bit weird. I feel like I went to the dark side now working for an ISP when I was working for the state government before, but in a good way, because, you know, I'm really getting to see the impact of, you know, what this broadband access can really do for a community and for typically underserved parts of our community. And as we are building our network out, of course, building the fiber to the home network takes a lot of resources and it takes a lot of time, and it really is a huge focus, obviously, of our organization right now. But in conjunction with that, while we are building out the infrastructure, I briefly mentioned this in my introduction, we also have to make sure that we are equipping the community with the tools and the knowledge and the skills to take advantage of what's going to be a huge community asset when it's available. You know, we want our community to get the full economic benefits out of it and truly use it to its fullest potential. And so, I mean, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but the network it's not going to do our community any good if they can't afford it, if they don't know how to use it, if they don't have devices to use it. So all of those things. And so we're thinking about all of these things, trying to take a more holistic approach rather than just let's string some wires up and connect the households that are willing to pay full price and that sort of thing. We're trying to take a more holistic approach. And I think being community owned, it's just intrinsically different than some other types of ISPs. And so, you know, our goal really is strictly to improve our community and to provide another utility in the Knoxville area in East Tennessee, just like we have with electricity and water for 90 years. And so in some ways, it's very similar to what we've done in the community for decades. And so I think being community owned sort of lends itself just naturally to developing these community partnerships because we've been in the community for so long. And we absolutely can't do this alone. So while we're building out this network, you know, we need community partners that help support it. So whether that's getting the word out that we are developing a low-income program or participating in a broadband stakeholder group or entities providing digital literacy classes. There's a variety of ways that we're working with our community partners to try to make sure our community is ready. When we have the ribbon cutting and we flip the switch and everybody has broadband now, so then what do you do with it? And a few examples of that in Knoxville, we're working with some nonprofits on helping administer our low-income program, which I'm going to talk about here in a second. Talking with folks like the United Way, Boys and Girls Club, Big Brothers Big Sisters, groups like that. Also our chambers of commerce. Certainly they view this as an economic development issue, which it absolutely is. And they, during the pandemic, formed a task force of broadband stakeholders within the community, folks from education and healthcare and workforce development and all sorts of groups to talk about, we know that this is an issue, this is an emergency situation, and how do we address this in a quick way? Sort of, that was sort of an emergency response, but now how do we take that group of people that are engaged and leverage it to create more long-term solutions? So I think right now we're still in the very early stages, as you said, Erin, but that's kind of the idea at this point. Is it seems like just about everyone in the community has some stake in making sure the community is connected to broadband. So we will involve anyone who wants to be at the table.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Knowing that some communities have struggled with the question of why people say no to free or low-cost internet. I know a number of communities struggle with that, and it seems kind of counterintuitive. Sam, you guys have been operating for a little bit longer. Can you share, in the experience of MetaMesh, what some longer-term partnerships have looked like, and some that are particularly effective in engaging the community and furthering digital inclusion efforts?
That's awkward, isn't it? Yeah, thanks, Erin. So I will just back up and provide a little bit more context on our overall business model. So our approach is to offer no-cost internet interventions for high-need communities. No cost meaning that it is free to the end user, but of course it's not a free service. Free is never free. And so our model is also based off of a sponsorship approach. It's not completely revolutionary. A lot of groups do sponsor utility services on behalf of their residents. And so we're just taking that approach and applying it to the wider community in Pittsburgh. And so we have partnerships where we have community-based organizations who might be bringing us to the community, letting us know what the problem is, helping us identify folks, and that is so important. It's critical. Oftentimes, those community organizations do go on to sponsor because they want to have skin in the game and they want their people to be supported. So that's just a little bit of background on how we're trying to do this. But when we're talking about long-term partnerships, for MetaMesh, it really is rooted in the higher education community. Someone said it before at another panel, connect to your universities. Our university partners with Carnegie Mellon University, University of Pittsburgh, and Penn State University are very strategic in nature. First of all, each of these institutions are linked to R&E networks. They're linked to actually Kinber Penn-Ren network. And that's where we purchase our bandwidth. It's a nonprofit to nonprofit vendor relationship, so that works really well for us. So there's that infrastructure piece that they can play. They have dark fiber networks. All you have to do is ask. We were afraid to ask, and we asked, and then we were riding on Pitt's dark fiber network to reach the communities that we needed to. So there's that important piece. But at the same time, you also have an incredible amount of enthusiasm for solving social issues. And I think it's kind of the spirit of research and socially driven research is that you have a lot of well-meaning people who might not necessarily have the direct lived experience that they're actually looking to understand. So there's that research element. There's options for partnerships there. We've worked with people who've written research grants to study how we interface with the community, our technology approach, and through that we're able to receive some grant support together. The last thing is that, most universities, if they take up a large footprint of any area, they're going to have a community engagement arm. And they're going to have probably some philanthropic motivations as well. Those are the groups that actually can speak as close as you can get to the lived experience, because they're actually stationed in the communities that we're serving. They're doing all kinds of community-based work. At the same time, universities, because they're institutions, often have histories of, unfortunately, exploitative practices. And so them recognizing that is an opportunity for us to partner and try and do some restorative work in these communities through this intervention. So there's that hunger there to make lasting change and to go back and try and fix some mistakes that were made. So we love our university partners. They understand our motivations and they support us in it.
Yeah, fantastic. That's a great tie into our last session too. I want to circle back to explore that leveraging infrastructure point here in a little bit also. But before that, Roxy, I worked in small town government in the past. Knowing that rural and small town local governments, community organizations often have very limited staff, often have limited technical capabilities or knowledge. Can you talk about how small town ISPs or ISPs serving small town and rural areas are particularly well suited to help support digital inclusion efforts, and just thoughts on how the types of ISPs that you represent can engage in that work?
Yeah, so when it comes to our membership and in general, when we're talking about community-based providers, those are your neighbors. They're the people in your community. So the fact that they're willing to serve is just simply asking one another, right? Whether it's asking the local nonprofit or the local community-based providers of, teaming up together. They both want to serve for the good, because at the end of the day, like our membership, nobody told them to come and, go to the community and provide service. It was out of their heart. It was out of them seeing the need in their own community to be like, hey, I'm going to buckle up and I'm going to provide service to my own community. Hence to why when it comes to just talk about digital equity and inclusion, that could mean access to their internet, right? It could mean access to digital devices, to even digital literacy. And our members understand that. For example, when it comes to access to the internet, a home telephone company, which is located in St. Jacob, Illinois, serving a population of 1,400, partners with the public school district to provide free internet to households with school-aged children in lower-performing schools. When it comes to digital devices, we're talking about Unitel, right? Unitel is located in Unity, ME, population around 3,000, where they provide funding for digital literacy training, right? And that's whenever they partner up with PCs for Maine to assist with required hardware, software, and all that good stuff. And last but not least, when it comes to digital literacy, a good example from one of our members is Triangle Telephone Company, which they offer their connected community program where they will fund digital literacy projects up to 2,500, right? So it's either them willing to give you a helping hand to even funding resources, right? And so that's just a little bit of the fact that they're part of the community as well. And so they're willing to, get their hands dirty and roll up their sleeves to put in this work.
Great, thank you. So this is your time, if you have a question, to line up and start asking them. I'm going to ask our panelists one more just to give folks an opportunity to, you're good there, yeah. I'm going to ask, well, you know what? I'm going to hold my question. We've got one ready to go, so yeah, why don't you go ahead.
Hello, my name is Alden Andy. I'm with the Washington State Broadband Office. It's kind of like a two-part question. One is, how did you connect with the Navajo Nation? And two, internet service providers, how are you avoiding overbuild?
Yeah. So When it came to Sacred Wind Communications, they serve around 22 Navajo chapters, right? So they have their own tribal liaison that got in contact with the Navajo Housing Authority. So it's more of like those pre-existing community partnerships, because it was John Badan that put together Sacred Winds, and he was from the community. He wasn't like any other individual or provider that came in. It was from, he was from the community. And when it comes to not doing overbuild, at the end of the day, these providers are the providers that are coming from the community, right? And so they understand the need. I mean, they understand, the whole mapping situation. So the fact that they are very aware, it's all about self-awareness, right? At the end of the day as well, because they also don't want to overbuild. They've seen those issues over and over again. And so that is my answer to your question.
I can talk about the overbuilding and say we're not avoiding it. So we have some areas that are extremely unserved. Like I mentioned, we have areas that are less than 5 homes per mile, and so it would not be an overbuild in that situation. Maybe there's a satellite provider or something, but no other provider that's providing any type of internet at all in some of those areas. But even in urban, densely populated areas, certainly we can't get grant funding. We can't be subsidized for building out those areas. But we are still building them because we still want to serve all of the household within our community. And adding another entrant to the market is a good thing for everyone, even for those who stay with Comcast or AT&T or whoever. Prices go down, service goes up. It's good for everybody. So I would say certainly it is kind of a two-pronged approach. But not treating those communities any differently. Everyone needs access to reliable, high-speed internet that's going to meet their needs, regardless of whether they're underserved or unserved or have options or whatever. So I would say we're planning to serve every household in our footprint.
Great. Thank you. I think fairly conversely, we actually cannot afford to overbuild. We are tied to budget, and we only go to communities with demonstrated need. We have to stay very agile and lean, and this is the way that we keep things, one, affordable to our sponsors, and two, ensuring that this is going to communities who are historically underserved or unserved. And we just use publicly available data to do that. The data isn't perfect, but it's what we have, and so that's our guideline. And that way we can hopefully avoid overbuild in the future.
I'm going to use my one editorial opportunity here. An area is not overbuilt if people can't afford to access internet in that area. And a lot of times overbuilding is another way to talk about or not talk about competition. So that's just not the official position, but that's my own editorial on that. Do we have other? Yeah.
Hi, Debbie with California Emerging Technology Fund. I'm really super interested in the Knoxville Utility Board plan, and I think I heard you mention that you are interacting, or you are collaborative, I guess, with utilities, other utilities. Are they part of your group, the energy and water?
Yes, we operate. This will be our 5th utility. So we operate an electric division, a water division, gas, wastewater. So broadband will be our 5th utility. So I call it a utility on purpose. It is a utility.
With those other utilities, are there other companies providing that as well, like
no?
Broadband?
So that's a really great point. We had a monopoly on those other 4 utilities. Sometimes you hear monopoly and you think that that's a bad thing, but in Tennessee, in the TVA Valley, it's sort of a monopoly on purpose, right? Is that you can only get your electricity from your one electric utility. Well, now entering the broadband space, which is extremely competitive, and where customer service is different and your marketing is different and everything is different. It's really it's a challenge to try to make sure you're still meeting the need of your community, but also you're dealing with the fact that you have competition now.
So I would assume because you have those other utilities, it would be easier to build right? Because you have access, all the right-of-ways. And
Right-of-ways, we
Yeah.
are hanging, our fiber on poles that we own, for example, so that can help
That's cool.
expedite the project, certainly.
And then will your customer service center support all those kinds of customers, like within the same?
I think we're going to do a little
group?
bit of both.
Yeah.
So we have about 1,000 employees right now. I think we're planning on hiring around 200 or so to support the fiber division. And part of those will be new customer service positions, but certainly can help cross-train and use folks from other utility service divisions as well.
Thanks,
So
that's super cool.
yeah,
The whole
lots
thing.
of part of it that we can use, and other parts that are totally brand new that we're still learning. So
Thank you.
yeah, absolutely.
And that's a pretty unique model, right? People may be familiar with electric co-ops providing broadband service, which is a little more common across the country, but I think what you all are doing in Knoxville is a pretty unique model that doesn't exist a lot of other places.
Well, one other place.
Yeah,
Chattanooga.
also Tennessee, yeah.
East Tennessee doing a very good job.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. It's a good model. It's a good model.
So while others think of questions, and I encourage you to hop up and make your way up to the mic. But in the meantime, I'll ask you all, aside from providing broadband access directly, a few of you have touched on some other ways you're engaged in digital inclusion work. So could you talk a little bit more specifically about what types of digital inclusion work ISPs are particularly well suited to get involved in?
I'll take this one. So I think that it's a unique question. Like, what do ISPs have? What kind of connection do they have with the people that they're serving to help inform this effort? I'd say that whenever you're deploying a service, if it's fixed, that is on someone's property, it's in their home, that's a touch point, that's an opportunity. If you're an ISP that's motivated to understand, not just do they pay their bill or not, or what is their streaming or internet traffic patterns that I can sell to someone else. If you have an ISP that actually cares about their individual goals, their workforce or their professional goals, their personal goals, how does the internet help them achieve those goals? If we are motivated to ask those questions, you have a captive audience. Talk to them. That's your opportunity.
Is it a cop-out to say that I think that ISPs have a responsibility to help the community with all aspects of digital inclusion, not just the physical network itself, but everything else, from helping make devices available to digital literacy. I mean, the full three-legged stool that we talk about. I think ISPs have a stake in that, and I think they should have a role in all pieces of the puzzle. And I don't think it's unreasonable to ask them to be involved in the entire digital inclusion strategy of a community. I think it's a two-way street. I think ISPs can't do it alone. I think they need support from local, state, and federal officials with funding and policies that help make it easier to provide service to people. But I do think they should be relied on to help meet the needs for the community in all aspects of digital inclusion. And I would say the lesson I learned when I was the state director was just ask. The worst thing that an ISP can do is just say no. They're not willing to help you. But if you don't ask, you're never going to know. So I would say continually involve them in conversations. If you had a falling out 10 years ago with your local ISP, go back to them and try to form that relationship again. Whoever is willing to work with you, be willing to work with them. Be open-minded to that.
I want to echo everything that you guys just said. It's important to have the ISP be part of every step. I mean, that's why NTCA has these different initiatives. So our members, we understand that, these small community-based providers don't have a lot of resources or staff, but we want to provide them those resources. Hence to why we have the SRC program, hence to why we're here pushing out white papers and letting them know the importance of digital inclusion, because it's not that they don't want to take part. Sometimes it's just they don't have the resources, the staff. Hence to why we're here going to put out a digital inclusion manual in the upcoming months, So just check it out. And it's going to start next month. But basically, it's going to allow our members to really look at the whole digital inclusion scope and take them from part one, which is the fundamentals of digital inclusion, going on to part two, which is developing digital inclusion, efforts. How do we go about when it comes to community partnerships? How can we reach out? And that's whenever we talk about asset mapping. And that's how we're going to be doing workshops with our members when it comes to that, and involving community partnerships. And then part three, how do we deliver these community digital inclusion efforts with not just the marketing team itself at the company, but with other outreach organizations. And last but not least, which are the case studies, which is part four, which, we will show our members, hey, the person that's next door to you that has this amazing company as well, did X, Y, and Z. So they could see themselves as like, okay, if they were able to do it, we can do it as well. So totally understand the whole, and we agree like that, our members and just ISPs in general should be part of the conversation from the beginning until the end, because they're the ones that are coming to these households, which is very, and I know we've have had many like different workshops, but talking about like that trust, right? Someone's coming to your house, right? That's a lot. That's you entrusting them with everything that you have, right? And so it's, having them involved from the get-go and to the end. But yeah.
You mentioned the three parts of the stool. You mentioned the three parts of the digital inclusion stool, and I was just curious as to how many internet service providers actually provide equipment or devices. I was always puzzled when the bill came out last year that ISPs, or people that provided service, got $100 credit, but the rest of us that provided refurbished computers did not. So that was a very limited group of people in my mind, and maybe in other parts of the country there were a lot of people that did it. But in Ohio, I think PCs for People has like a little test group up in Cleveland, and that's about it. So are you aware in the industry, are there any ISPs that are actually doing, like you said, the three parts of the stool? Are they doing that third step, that third part of the stool?
If I can just jump in, not just because PCs for People sitting in the front row, but they were killing it in Columbus. They sent thousands of computers down to Columbus. So.
Oh, okay. Well, but is anybody else other than PCs for People doing that?
Human IT. Oh, okay. Human IT out of LA.
So I think if I can clarify the question, so it was the question, internet service providers were able to get a subsidy to provide devices through the EBB program, and the question was how many ISPs were actually delivering on that? Was that the question?
Not necessarily speaking for KUB, because we don't have any active customers yet, but in the state of Tennessee, the number is extremely low in terms of the number of providers who were participating in EBB, and then the percentage that were using the device credit, I know was pretty low. I don't know if it was like that across the country, but that was the case in Tennessee.
Sorry to jump in, I'm not on the panel. But it's listed on the FCC website who provides devices, and a lot of Lifeline providers are, but they're providing tablets, and they might not be the best use case for getting a large screen device. Benton Institute also pushed out an article of the 94% of subscribers are on 14 cable companies, and you can go on there and see if they're providing a device benefit, and the only one who is Cox. Cox happens to work with us. And like you said, it's a forced fit in ISPs. It really shouldn't be probably with ISPs, but that's the way they developed it. So we've had to build data exchanges with Cox, where they go out to USAC and NLAD. Someone's eligible. We have a real-time system with them to make sure they actually are eligible, haven't used device credit, and we're shipping it. But I'd like to see all ISPs develop that. There's a robust nonprofit refurbishing infrastructure in the US that would have capacity for all of those big subscribers to be the device suppliers. And then for efficient use of federal funds, I actually think it makes sense. We can produce devices at $100, $150 and stretch those funds, even though there's billions, to make sure everyone has a large screen device.
We're from Computer Reach in Pittsburgh. We partnered with MetaMesh, and we also partnered with Comcast. And I asked our Comcast rep in Pittsburgh if we could provide computers the way Casey does, and they said no. They said, well, let me check with Philadelphia. And Philadelphia didn't return the call. And finally I said, we could get computers to you, and they weren't interested. So we tried, but they just kind of blew us off. Hope Comcast is in the room here.
So I think this is illustrating the difference in partnership models and the effectiveness of partnerships when you see kind of the approach that different types of internet service providers take and kind of the level of engagement they have in their communities.
I just wanted to add, so as you know, a non-traditional ISP, we did not fit into the EBB ACP model. So we don't participate in it because according to the FCC, that's a direct to consumer rebate. And we don't charge the consumer anything for our service. And so we weren't eligible to participate. But that wasn't part of our business planning. We can move on without that. But to the question about these other opportunities and those sort of additional options that these funds can create, if I could provide devices, I would go to Dave at Computer Reach. It's all about, for us, leveraging existing community resources and avoiding duplicating efforts, which is commonplace when you have a lot of people trying to do the same good thing. So that's our approach.
I have a question. Hi, yes. I'm Samantha Goodwin. I'm the broadband coordinator for Tillamook County, which is just west of here on the coast. So I guess I have a persistent frustration kind of question that keeps coming up with community members. I'm new to the space. I've only been working in broadband for about 6 months, so it's all new to me. And one of the things that people often ask me is like, why does the internet cost so much? And I'm like, I don't know. As internet service providers, you're selling the internet. What does that even mean? And like, I get that there's infrastructure costs and costs to like pay people to answer phones and run a business and all this stuff. But like, why is it $80 a month for, maybe 100 megabytes in my town, but it's like $10 for a gigabyte in another town? But like, why? And what is the real cost? Like, people say, what's affordable? What's low cost internet? Like, what is, how can we make a business case? Like, how low can we go? And it's like, I don't know. So I wondered if you guys had some perspective on that.
I can talk about that a little bit. I would say there's a difference between what a provider can offer service at and what they are willing to offer service at and what margin they want to make on that service and that sort of thing. So you're right. There's a lot that goes into the business model and the cost, the construction of the network and maintaining it and your employees and all that stuff. But I also think the type of provider that you are is extremely important. So a for-profit provider that's investing broadband infrastructure in an area wants a payback period of 3 years for their investment. Whereas a municipal provider like Knoxville, we are charging $65 a month for 1 gig symmetrical service, and that's our lowest package. We're not going to offer anything less than a gig symmetrical service, and we're going to have a low income program because we don't have that same requirement of that payback period, so to speak, in 3 years, right? So that nonprofit type provider, that municipal type provider, I think can help provide service and be a resource in some of these areas that are extremely rural or for some other reason are expensive to serve. I think, to me, that's a reason. Of course, and the third thing is competition. Competition tends to lower prices in areas as well. So, I'm a customer of another ISP where I live, and of not KUB, because we're not providing service yet. And as soon as KUB announced that they were going to be providing service, my internet bill went down in Knoxville just because they had made the announcement. So not that that's a bad thing. I'm glad I'm paying less for the internet, but I think there are a lot of factors that go into it. And it's definitely not black and white or a science. I wish it was.
Sarah, yeah, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to take this off. Thank you for this conversation. My name is Sarah Ali. I'm with Multnomah County. You are currently in Multnomah County. My question for the internet service providers is kind of looking back and looking forward. If you could give some examples in the past of how you've worked with local government, whether city or counties, and in the future, how would you like to work with local government to help bring broadband to the people? Thank you.
Okay, I have two examples for you. One was a difficult experience and the other was less. But I think what you have in local government are people who are embedded in their communities. Often they've been in their roles for a long time. And so, you know, that brings pros and cons. Some don't like to change things. Some really cling to bureaucracy. And that is something that any external organization is going to have to navigate. So you really do want to ID those inside champions. One of those experiences were basically working with a water and sewage authority within one of the towns that we were trying to serve in order to place our infrastructure on their water tower. And it was a lot of silence, radio silence, a lot of we didn't know where we stood, what was the attitude, were we welcome, were we not? And we were just so persistent that they just said, okay, this needs to be off the docket, and we were able to issue a site license agreement. But it was not always clear that that was going to be the case. Recently, we're partnering with a borough in one of the communities that we're expanding into. This borough has had a lot of leadership change. Recently is going through an annexation, so not associated with the city of Pittsburgh anymore. Lots of politics happening. At the same time, they have a really high unconnected population. So we've been able to kind of, again, work ourselves into that ecosystem, being there when conversations are being had, and talking to the people who might not necessarily have the bandwidth to help you, but have the understanding and just general support of your objective. And so we're working towards a better, basically a more mutually beneficial partnership with that local government, because they connected us to the library, they've connected us to, the CDC, people. And those are the people in that community that knew the other right people to talk to. So be patient when working with local governments. They're overburdened, but I think overall there's a good intention there, so very worthwhile.
I feel a little weird answering this because I am a local government. But I will say it's kind of interesting how much ISPs want to work with local governments right now that they have state and local ARP funding that the ISPs can take advantage of. And I say that as an ISP. But 5 years ago when the community reached out to the ISP and said, we desperately need you to provide service to this area, they weren't necessarily willing to do that. So I think it's important for communities to remember those conversations. And like I said, I don't remember what the question was earlier, but I said, work with whoever is showing genuine interest in helping you solve this issue in your community, and not just who's coming and asking for your ARP dollars. I think there's a distinct difference there. And, I as someone who used to give out money for a living on the state level, I can say there's a huge difference in the success of the projects where you can see there was a true local community focus and community support of the project.
So if I can follow up on that very quickly, because there's a little talk about infrastructure before. So if we have community-based organizations or folks with local governments in the room, and they want to think about how do they link up an ISP in their community or an ISP that could serve an unserved area, particularly some of the rural and small community areas. What should they do? So do you call up the city CIO and say, hey, tell me where your dark fiber is that we could tap into? Or how do you find out about I think a lot of particularly school districts and small communities just found out what a REN is, and that they probably have one running somewhere relatively close to their community, even if they didn't know it was there. So, who's the phone call or email go to?
We actually stole this idea from, I think it was Indiana, Broadband Ready Communities in Tennessee. So one of the, it was a requirement that if the community passed an ordinance or a policy that included various things, you can impose a seasonal moratorium on permitting, and there were several things in there. One of the things in there was the community had to appoint a single point of contact for broadband related issues for the community, because most communities don't have that person. So to Aaron's question, as an ISP, you don't know who you're supposed to call. You could call the mayor's office, I guess, but you don't specifically know who is working on that issue. And that was a way that we addressed it on the state level, was that we encouraged communities to become a broadband ready community. And one of the requirements was that they had to actually name a point of contact for this issue. And they had to fund a person to work on broadband full time. So I would say I think it varies from community to community. I would also say that's another advantage of working with a community owned, not to keep mentioning that because I'm biased, but that's another advantage of working with a community owned provider, is we tend to know who those people are because we've been working in the community for decades.
Okay. Hello, my name is Carly Fitz, and I'm from Southeastern Ohio. I'm the Broadband Access Specialist for Perry County, and I'm actually in a fellowship with Lead for America, which places us back in our hometowns to work on initiatives such as broadband. So in my role so far, I've been working, same as Sam, since late August, and just meeting with all the internet service providers. And we've had a lot of facilitation between local governments, such as what you've been mentioning. But one of the biggest problems that they keep approaching with me with is that they are facing a labor shortage. So while collaborating with our workforce coordinator, we've been working with career centers to create those fiber technician programs. And I'm just wondering, what are your guys' approaches to recruiting those individuals, and what other programs are you guys using to find that workforce? Because with all this federal funding coming down, there's like a huge need for all these programs. So I'm just wondering what your guys' thoughts are on that.
So when it comes to the NTCA members, I can't think. I'm trying to remember the name, but a couple of our companies, start from the high school level, right? They begin at an early stage, trying to get their interest in high school, right? And if they want to go to college, great, right? If not, then there's like a workforce training development right after high school where they take part and get them involved at an early stage, whether that's in high school or after college. So most of our membership already have internship programs set in stone for summer internships in high school to even, after high school. So they want to maintain that workforce because they understand the importance of being from the community and, providing that service from them themselves. So early on, I know that NTCA members have that essence, that need for them to still be locally, owned, right? So they could provide the services. So many of our members do have internship programs since then.
So for us, currently we're a team of 4, including myself. But we recently received some really life-changing funding. So I'm in the process right now of hiring. And it's tough out there, it really is. And there's a level of, this discussion about skilled labor and what that means, and, what can we do to make sure that our team reflects the communities that we serve. And so the option that we have and the role that we need to staff up most are the field technicians, the field installers. It's an excellent opportunity because you don't need a lot of advanced education in order to succeed, and you can make a lot of money doing this. It's a really lucrative field. So our plan is to basically recruit directly from the communities that we're currently serving and offer full end-to-end training so that that person who might have, a little bit of an inclination for techie stuff is actually fully trained and able to, move on from our organization and get a job at wherever they would like to in the future. So that's our plan, but it's not always easy to bring those things to fruition, especially the way things are right now in the market and things like that.
So Crystal, I appreciated your point about each of your organizations being really based in your community and of the community. So as our closing question, we have just a couple minutes left. I'm going to ask each of you to share one thing that people in the audience walking out of here can do right away if they want to further partnerships in their communities, particularly mutually beneficial partnerships for both the communities and the internet service providers they want to partner with. So what's one thing that folks in the room can do to get that started or to advance that type of work?
I could go first. So I would say the understanding of a needs assessment, to really look at the community, ask them the questions of what they need, and really see, okay, what are the resources that are there at the moment, and then based off of the resources and even the need from the community, and even asking these questions of what do you guys want, from providing internet service, right? And then going from there, right? Because we can say, oh, they need X, Y, and Z, when in reality, all they wanted was to download, X app, or learn more about how to even use the internet, right? So it's just more like asking the community themselves, like, what do you guys want? Serving the community. And, I'm all about asset mapping. I know I keep saying that, but that's what I would say.
I have two. Is that cheating? Okay, so the first one I would say is when you're working with an ISP, find their why. I think everybody in this room, including myself, is biased and just thinks, of course, the ISP wants to help with digital inclusion. It's the right thing to do. They should want to help the community. And I think you've got to go beyond that, and you've got to help them understand what's in it for them, how they benefit from this, why they should support this. Sometimes it's not as apparent to them as it is to you. So make sure they fully understand that. And then the other thing I would say is we need local data so bad. So when I was the state director, I, was constantly battling the quality of the FCC data, or I would talk to community and I would ask them what the broadband landscape looks like there, and they would pull something off of the census or the American Community Survey or something, and that's all fine. But as I'm now working in a local ISP, I see just the incredible need for local data. So a year and a half ago, when KUB was approached by local leadership to sort of investigate whether we should provide broadband or not, the very first thing we did was a community survey. We asked people, do you want KUB to provide broadband? Would you be interested in switching? Do you even have access to broadband now? We didn't even have the answers to those questions prior to that survey, if you can believe that. So I think collecting local data and collecting data that I think sort of affirms what we already know is going on within our communities, but having that local data to help you get grant funding or help you make adjustments to your programming is really important. We worked with the University of Tennessee, who conducted an economic impact study. So they basically said if KUB is to build out this fiber to the home network in their footprint, it's going to have this economic impact. It's going to create this many jobs. And again, having that kind of data helps us go out and get grant funding. It helps us make our programs more effective. So I would say the two things I would recommend going and doing are working with your ISPs and helping explain to them what their why is and what they get out of this. And then going back to your communities and starting to collect. Don't rely on the federal government or the state government. Start collecting your own local data.
Crystal, you took the words out of my mouth. No, that's okay. No, but I mentioned the idea of motivation earlier, and I think that speaks to exactly what you need to understand. What is the motivation? For us, our motivation is mission. So it's great. But if you don't have an ISP that's mission driven or isn't necessarily concerned about social issues, maybe the motivation is profit. That's not wrong, but you have to meet them where they are. Maybe the motivation is redemption. Speak to that. We're having a moment of reckoning here. Make it easy for these ISPs to make impact through you, and market it that way. All of the things that we're hearing about these new federal opportunities are focused on, cross-sectional partnerships. They want to see, at least in my state of PA, they want to see an ISP that's partnered with another group, that's partnered with another group, and those are the things that are going to get funding. Of course, a lot of that money is going to go to incumbents, but there are going to be opportunities. So understand the motivation, try not to villainize, I'd say, and meet them where they are, because together you guys can achieve the same outcome.
Great, thank you all so much. In a moment, we're going to thank our panelists. Before that, I want to give just a quick announcement. They mentioned it upstairs, but in case folks weren't in the room, the schedule is changed a little bit for the rest of the day. Going to take about 10 minutes, maybe not even quite 10 minutes, and then have everybody reconvene upstairs in the ballroom. We're going to have a very quick closing for today, probably just another 10 or maybe 15 minutes, and then we'll wrap up by about 4 o'clock, so everybody will get a nice long break before the reception. So we'll see you all up there, and with that, let's thank our fantastic panelists for a great conversation.